Hello and welcome to the Mobile Accessible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Mobile Accessible Games is a group that's focused on all things about mobile accessible gaming, and through our interview series, we interview game developers, accessibility influencers, as well as accessibility advocates. And this week, we have a developer of a game that I've become completely addicted to. His name is Matias Colotto, and he is the developer of Magic Research, which is a great, fun, idle RPG crafting type of game. I'll have him kind of explain it to you. But Matthias, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice meeting you. So he is all the way over in Japan, so we are about 13 hours apart. I'm waking up very early, and he's staying up really late to do this interview. So I thank you for that. I always like to kind of just start the interview series of, you just telling us a little bit about yourself. Just give us a little, brief bio of, who you are, and so we can get to know you a little bit.
Sure thing. So I'm Matias. So I'm a software engineer by trade. I studied software engineering in college, and that's it. So that was about 10 years ago. I graduated from a college in Argentina. I was originally born in Argentina. I studied software engineering there. And afterwards, I joined a startup in Argentina, which is called Tienda Nube. It's kind of like a small company that builds like storefronts for like small businesses.
Hmm.
And then a year or two later, like I got a job offer from Facebook. And at that time, I moved to the United States. That was already like about
In Palo Alto, go up there.
yeah, that around there. I was living in Mountain View for a while, and then I moved to Los Angeles. So that was about 8 years ago. I was working there for like 7 or 8 years, and then towards about 1 year ago, like, well, I was thinking about it for a while already at that time, but my girlfriend and I have been wanting to live in Japan for a while to experience how it is to like just like have a different sort of
Yeah,
like experience
sure.
uh, in life, and we were both interested in the country. So we decided to at that time, since well, with COVID we were not able to, but around that time the borders, like Japanese borders, started to open. So we decided to come here to study the Japanese language. And so that's what I'm personally doing now. I'm like the actual thing I'm doing is studying the Japanese language as a language school student. That said, as a side project, I've been working on magic research
Yes.
pretty much since I quit my job at Facebook. And it's been like I spent about 6 months or so developing it, or 6, 7 months before its initial release on Android. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And what was really surprising to me was that there's just a lot of people interested in it.
Yes.
And people are finding it really fun as well. So I actually find that inspiring, and I'm dedicating a lot of time to that too. So I'm doing a bit of both things at once.
Yeah, it's a really unique unicorn, Magic Research, in that it's kind of like an idle crafting game, but it has a storyline that you're actually, progressing through. And then it has a lot of, RPG components, as well as a really good and interesting, and we'll talk about this a little later, but a really interesting um, battle component that really requires a lot of strategy and thought. And you really put I think a lot of thought in making each boss battle really different from the other boss battles. You can't go in and do the same approach and expect to beat every single boss. You really have to change your loadout, change your attack style, change your defense style in order to beat these various bosses, because each of them are attacking a particular weakness or setting up a particular defense that you need to crack. So I thought that was really great, and we'll talk all about that. So where in Japan are you located?
So
Tokyo.
I'm staying in Tokyo. Yeah.
Okay,
Most of the things that happen in Japan happen in Tokyo. So
sure. And
I am
how's the language learning going?
it's difficult. To be really honest, I'm pretty frustrated with it at the moment because I've been studying for 9 months already, and I still feel like I have a hard time like just understanding any sort of conversation in Japanese, unless it's me basically talking to the teacher and the Japanese teacher basically knows my skill level of Japanese, and then they use words and vocabulary and grammar even that like is easier to understand. I feel like I could probably have a conversation with people, but they need to be patient. And I think people don't really know like what are the things that I would know or that I don't know, and then they get nervous, and then it's harder.
Right.
It's definitely hard and frustrating.
I have no affinity for language. I tried very hard in high school to learn Spanish and was terrible at it. I just don't have, I'm a great math person. I'm a great numbers person. I am not a great language person. So I'm impressed. I'm sure you know Spanish as well as your English is great. So I'm sure you'll get there with the Japanese, but that is a skill set I do not have at all.
I think learning Japanese is probably much harder than learning Spanish. Or if you already know English, Spanish is a little tricky, but Japanese is an entire different world, I would say.
Yeah. Um, so, you said 6 months ago, where you decided to create this game, Magic Research. How did this pop into your head? Like, what is the spark that made you think of this game?
Yeah, so in my free time, basically I'm a gamer, right? So I play a lot of games similar to Magic Research and also very different. I've been a lot into indie games, like many different kinds, like many different genres too. Well, I will say what got me started into Magic Research. Well, I will say first of all, like I've always loved the idea, the concept of being a wizard and being able to use magic to like solve many different kinds of problems. Like whenever I play a role-playing game, I always tend to like be a wizard. And so I had always this loose idea that like it will be cool if there was a game where you will be like a wizard and be able to discover a ton of different spells that do a lot of different things, and they're not just like generic. Okay, it's just an attack spell that you use like typically in a game, for example, or a healing spell or whatever. Um, and so I started like playing around with the idea and thinking, yeah, that could be like a we could make like an idle incremental, well, not really an idle game, more like an incremental game where like you basically learn.
This is a reminder. Market research.
Yeah. So we could like basically like try making an incremental game where like you discover all those different and new ways to use spells. And then when I started like prototyping it and working on it, and then as I finally implemented the apprentices feature,
Mhm.
which you unlock near the beginning of the game, it's the automation piece of it. I realized that it was very powerful and very interesting. Like it was like the entire thought process of like how do you organize your apprentices to achieve the task that you need to achieve? Like do you prioritize like I don't know, like creating water, or do you prioritize like improving your combat ability or like any of the other things that you can do with spells, which there are quite a few. I thought it was like it involved quite a bit of decision making that I thought was interesting. And so at that point, like I thought it was worth like actually investing a little more and like fleshing this out into a proper game. And what I found is that the more I worked on it, the more addicted I got to playing it.
Yeah,
So that's really interesting. So
I'm
it's
super addicted to it right now.
yeah. So that's something I didn't really expect. So normally, like I've made games in the past, but never released them commercially, always like either as a hobby or as a school project or things like that. But one thing that happened to me with Magic Research was that even though I am a gamer and I love playing games, I will find myself wanting to play my own game over other games. And that is pretty crazy because if you think about it, if you make the game, you already know all the rules. You
Right.
know, if there's a winning strategy, you already know it.
Right.
If like there's something to discover, you also already know it. But I still wanted to play it, so I thought it made me think I have something special here.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so
You
that's why
know,
like I kept investing.
there are some things, and to give people again, as you said, you put yourself in charge of a dilapidated magic academy, and your whole goal is to build up the buildings that create more resources or generate mana. You get to hire apprentices who will eventually cast spells for you automatically. You have researchers who will research all the different schools of magic that you have, like conjuring or protection or breeding, whatever the various ones are. Um, and what is really kind of fascinating about the game, as you kind of just go through it starts very simple. It doesn't look like it's much at the beginning. I've had a couple people who I've talked to who have started it and like, oh, it didn't just look like I clicked the button a lot. They didn't get far enough to realize that it just keeps opening up more and more and more things. And again, even with the start, I think you start with 3 magic schools. I think I have 8 maybe or 9 magic schools now that have opened up over time. You start with just a few spells to begin with, but I gotta imagine you have over 100 different spells um, that are possible, and each really are kind of different from the other. So you also pick kind of an elemental um, focus, if you will. So you might be fire or water or earth or nature, and each of those are different. Like the nature one is basically a bunch of poison spells that deplete the person over time, and so that's kind of like a whole different strategy than maybe lightning, which is just like a quick one-off burst, but costs you a lot of mana to execute on. So like you got to think about what is the tool set I have in me, and how can I break down the enemies that are ahead of me. Or as you were saying, maybe I'm not really looking to fight any enemies right now. I'm really looking to just kind of build up my academy, and I need to generate a lot of water and wood and stone and things like that, and money. And I just do my whole loadout for my apprentices, all about like a building loadout. Um,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
there's various things that you did. Again, I think you're just so special about that. I mean, even with the apprentice loadout, you have 4 different savable loadouts. So I can build one that's all about gathering and save that as a loadout, call it gathering, and I know that's what I want to select when I'm in a gathering mode. And then I can have one that is a fighting mode, and I set it all, take everything off of gathering and put it all into defense and offense, and name that loadout, fighting, and be able to switch between the two very quickly without having to manually switch back and forth, taking on and off apprentices. So I thought that
yeah,
was
no, that would be terrible.
yeah, I thought that was really great. And you do the same thing with your equipment loadout. You basically have an accessory, a piece of armor, and a weapon. Again, hundreds of different choices and mixes and matches that you can do there. But you allow the same thing. You allow to save 4 combinations of what you're wearing depending on who you're fighting. You might want to have just things that generate a lot of high mana generation and high mana capacity, depending on one enemy. But another enemy who might cast silence on you, and you can't really use any of your magic. Well, then you want to switch and have just kind of a traditional sword and a traditional armor, and
Yeah,
traditional weapon.
which is a little funny given that you're a wizard, but
Yeah,
it works.
I
Yeah,
go
things.
mostly. I'm like the wizard with a sword. I have like my wizard robes and my wizard hat, and I'm carrying a big flaming sword. That's usually kind of
Yeah,
how.
that also works. That
Yeah.
works totally fine. Thanks a lot for describing the game, by the way. I realized I didn't really describe it so well. You're right that it's a game that opens up like as you progress through the game. At first, it may seem like a very simple game or a game without a point, but the more you play, the more things you unlock, and it's actually intentional.
Yeah.
So as I was like, there are other games that do the same thing, but I feel like one of the things that I was trying to do while building this game is to try and basically get the player to enjoy discovering things.
Hmm.
So as you as you were mentioning, like at first you begin with only three schools of magic, but later on you unlock more and more until you end up with like eight or nine or so, right? And each one of them is different and has a lot of new gameplay elements that adds to like the depth of the game and introduce new concepts to the game. And
And
basic,
new spells and like I just unlocked a new elemental that I hadn't used before, and I realized there's a whole different set of conjuring spells that I'd never seen before that came with choosing
yeah,
choosing that school or that element.
yeah. So the idea is, the idea of this is like basically like when I actually got this one from my own experiences. When I play games, I love discovering new things, and it's a pattern that I like noticed throughout many different games, like and throughout many different genres. Like it keeps me going in the game, keeps me
Yeah.
want to continue playing, and so I felt like it will be like I tried to leverage that as much as possible in Magic Research. That's why there are so many things that unlock progressively. That's why there is the concept of storylines that like have important and strong effects, but then you never know about them, at least for a while.
Yeah, that is the great thing too is so you have these kind of side quest storylines, kind of like a main quest, which is to reach the Wizard Tournament and win it. But along the way, you have little side quests that beat this person or discover this thing, and they give you little incremental improvements. It might be, oh, you found something, and when you restart your academy, because there's that whole kind of component that we can talk about. When you restart the academy and start from the beginning again, you'll have a 2% increase to your capacity of all resources. And when you keep layering, and I think there's 92 or so side quests. When you keep layering on those, suddenly it becomes all exponentially increasing your ability to advance the game. It gets very intentional, I think, where you kind of have these choke points where you go as far as you can, and literally you're stuck. You cannot advance any further. And at first, to be honest, I didn't know that you really are supposed to kind of retire and restart. I just wasn't aware that that kind of like my first playthrough. So I got frustrated because I was like, I literally can't do it. I can't upgrade anything anymore, and this enemy is too strong, and I don't see any path to ever being able to get past this. But when you retire, that's when all these things that you've gathered, all these side quest rewards kick in, and now you can move a little bit further. That boss that you couldn't beat, now you can get past them, and you get into an area where you can, upgrade your buildings a little bit more, upgrade yourself a little bit more, and move a little bit further. So it requires you to, retire multiple times to improve yourself, improve your skill sets and your defense and offense and gathering and capacity of things in order to advance the game. So that's also really important to know because again, you might kind of get yourself frustrated there.
Yeah, it's actually a mechanic that is common to many incremental games. Um, they use the concept of prestiging. Usually they call it prestige because I think there's like an old game that introduced that term. But essentially, it's basically you restart the game again from the beginning, but then you have bonuses that make the game much faster than it was before and let you go further than you were able to go before.
Right.
And in Magic Research, you have that like that is basically retiring, right? That gives you a big multiplier to research, which actually makes you able to discover more spells in the same amount of time. And also it gives you a production modifier, which makes you build things faster and be able to cast more spells as well, because it affects mana generation.
Mm-hmm.
And also it makes the bonuses from the storylines kick in as well.
Right. And there's all in these kind of incremental games, what's so important is to have a good balance. So, at first I was very nervous. I went really far on one playthrough, probably farther than one is expected to get. And I was nervous about retiring, but because I was like, oh, I'm going to start all the way. I've been playing for 4 days straight. Am I going to really start this all over again? But when you retire, you can get back to what took you 4 days in, I don't know, 8 hours of play, maybe 6 hours of letting the thing run. So what took you 4 days now takes you, half a day because of all those multipliers. And so I thought that was really ingenious as well, of just, restarting doesn't really make you feel like I'm losing progress. You quickly get back to where you were, and then you're, trying to beat that boss that you were stuck on just, half a day ago. I thought that was really well done on how you kind of crafted that.
It's another the reason why incremental games have this component is because it gives satisfaction to be able to see that all that thing that took you so much effort to do before, now you're so much stronger that you can do it much more easily.
Yeah.
And then you retire again, and it's even easier.
Yeah.
Maybe that thing that took you 6 hours, now it's going to take you 1 hour.
Right. I had a boss battle because, again, I told you I played on the first playthrough way too long, and I had a boss battle that literally took me 2 hours to win.
Oh wow!
Because I was literally stopping every 5 seconds and topping off my health, and because I was really weak, but had a gazillion health potions, it literally took me 2 hours to beat this boss. And I retired, and I came back, and I zipped through them in 15 minutes or something like that. I was like, this is, I wasted a lot of time playing this 2 hour battle. But I can't tell you how excited I was when I won that battle. It was down to the wire. I think I had 20 hit points left when I beat him. That's the thing about those boss fights is each of them are really exciting. Each of them have really interesting mechanics, whether the enemy's poisoning you, or they're silencing your casting, or they cast Dispel, which takes all the enchantments that you put on yourself, wipes them all out. You'll have somebody who will banish. You get a chance to summon a monster to fight alongside you. You can have, which is a really great component, because they end up being kind of the tank for you. They take a lot of the damage while you can concentrate on just attacking the enemy. But you'll have an enemy who will just banish them, and bye goes your summon, and you're still in a 200-second cooldown before you can cast them again, and then you're fighting on your own suddenly when you had so long relied on that summon to help you win battles. Now you finally find yourself, well, I can't rely on that, and now I'm scrambling. And that's what I just found really special about this game, is each of those boss battles are different and unique and require really a different strategy. On this kind of incremental game, there's got to be so much math, and there's so much scalability, because again, you're constantly unlocking things and unlocking mechanics and unlocking buffs or to kind of your capacity, or how much you're producing of various things. How do you keep straight basically all of that math, and how did you build it in a way that allowed for it to be incrementally improved? Because I imagine you came up with ideas, and then you added them on from whatever your base original idea was, and how do you make sure that your structure is set up in a way that makes that a smooth process?
Well, I think let me just try to understand the question first. Are you referring specifically to say, for example, I add a new feature, and then I add another feature on top of it? How do I make sure that it's still balanced? Or are you referring more to how is the game able to put all of those factors together correctly?
I actually have both questions. So the balance was going to be my next question, but it's just the first question is just structurally, how do you set it up? Do you have a database? Do you have incremental slots that are they're set up and already available, so when you add something, it's easy to kind of incorporate it into whatever formula you've built? And then kind of
Yeah, got it,
your,
got it. I
second,
understand.
yeah. And your second question
Yes.
is very much just like, how do you keep balance? How do you end up not adding something and just totally breaking the game?
Got it. So I'll answer first your first question and then the second question. So as for the first question, it's a little technical, but I built basically what I call a transformations framework that basically like it's on a like a part of my code where basically I can feed in a number and then a set of tags, for example, attack, player, right? And then it will take that and then it will take that number and then process it through a set of transformations to produce what is going to be the final number. So for example, let's say I want to calculate what is the player's attack, right?
Mhm.
There's many things that can modify that. For example, you can have an item like a weapon that changes it. You will have like a spell, like a temporary effect, like a buff that also modifies it. Then you could also have, I don't know, maybe some penalty or something that makes like all attacks like decrease by 50%, like the
Right.
attack power decreases by 50%, or things like that.
Right.
Basically, when I try to calculate the attack, I run this transformation system, and then each separate item or separate thing that can affect attack, all they need to do is just say, hey, I have a transformation for the attack status or for this set of tags, right? If you're talking about the player attack, then I want to transform it. And basically, the sword will do it, the buff will do it, the penalty will also do it. And then as I run those transforms and get the final value, like I'm able to just like scale that with like the amount of items and everything, because I don't really need to like the base attack, like the code that processes the attack doesn't really need to know about all of that. And because it basically the sword just kind of registers itself kind of like as a listener of like, or as an I will say like kind of like as a callback or something like that, where like whenever the attack gets calculated, we know we need to call that transformation first to see if it needs to be applied. But then the actual code that calculates the attack doesn't really know about it, doesn't really have to know about it. And so I can add hundreds of items and buffs and things like that that can affect the stat, but then it doesn't affect the complexity of the code.
Okay.
So I can keep it scaling in that way. I'm not sure if that was exactly the answer you were looking for.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
There is
Because
like a base formula, like
yeah,
a basic.
my wonder was like, let's say you have, you have your sword, and that's as you said, let's just say hit attack of 100, and then you have, I cast a spell which increased my attack 10%. Well, now that's 110, and then you have something else where the enemies weakened you by 50%. So now we're at attack of 55. But I mean, there's dozens and dozens of spells. So like, is it kind of like, and some spells might not be cast, and you're kind of generating this every second. Every second, these numbers have to be changing. So it just seems like, I don't know. My brain instantly starts getting fried of like, how do you structure that, keep that all going, and knowing what's being cast, what's not being cast, what's dropping off because it's effect for 50 seconds has now run out, and so now it doesn't apply.
Yeah, I get it.
Every second that's changing, that just seems so overwhelming to me. I imagine there's got to be a way, and I think you're trying to explain it, but it seems like it's so difficult.
I think I understand the question though. The answer I think is computers are pretty powerful these days.
Yeah.
So like you can actually do a crazy amount of calculations and inefficiency. And to be honest, yeah, like as you play the game, probably the game is calculating the attack pretty often. Like every time you attack, it's going to recalculate like how much is your attack, right?
Right.
And it's going to like basically call all of those things that could modify the attack power. But actually that just happens in a split second and you don't even notice it. And that is probably one of the cheapest ones. you could say, for example, even the mana generation, for example, depends on this. And that one is like, it's basically called all the time, because every time the screen refreshes, which is 20 times per second, I think by default, or 30, like we are recalculating like how much mana should be generated
Right.
so that we actually add the mana. And
Yeah,
so
because you have
I would say computers are
dozens
pretty
of
powerful.
spells that are being cast at the same time and constantly changing that. I even had that too. Like, um, I wondered about this. So, let's say you have a summon. I won't say what the summon monster is, but later on you can summon something that costs you 25,000 mana, right?
Mhm.
And but below that, I mean, you're casting other spells that cost you 1,000 mana or 900 mana or 5,000 mana. Um, it seems like you could end up casting all of those other spells so fast that you don't really get yourself up to 25,000 mana to cast the big spell. You know what I mean? So it seemed like that mathematically could end up happening to you, but it never actually seemed to happen to me. So I didn't know if just
Yeah.
there was something
So
unique about that that you have to kind of make sure that doesn't happen to you.
it's so I will say so usually when you're at that point of the game, most of the spells that you cast end up being cast by apprentices,
Right.
which basically are the means that the game has to automatically cast spells for you, right? You just set them and then they cast spells.
Right.
So one thing is that the game basically estimates how much mana consumption will come from those apprentices, depending on how many you assign to what spell.
Right.
So if say you assign more apprentices, and if you assign apprentices and then those apprentices will cast spells and require more mana than you will be normally generating or that you're generating at that point, the game shows you a warning. It tells you like
Yeah.
you be careful because you cannot like upkeep this mana consumption from apprentices. And so at that point you can remove apprentices from certain spells so that you can basically upkeep this consumption. And then if you do, then you shouldn't run into a situation when you're casting where those apprentices are casting a lot of smaller spells and never getting to cast a big ticket one because the game already calculated that you already had enough mana regeneration.
Hmm.
Right. So that's kind of like how it's solved. But yeah, totally if actually you assign a lot of apprentices and then you ignore the warning, then yeah, you could run into a situation like this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's easily you have a thing of how much mana capacity you have and how much are you generating and and what your level is. So you can see that number creeping up or creeping down. If if you had assigned too many people, you'll always be hanging around zero on your available mana to cast spells. So going kind of to the second question is, with all of these different mechanics and with you introducing new things, how do you keep the game from becoming imbalanced? How do you end up preventing, oh, I added this new spell that I have this really cool idea. I added this new spell at level 25, but how do you make sure that spell doesn't create a game-breaking situation where suddenly everything's really super easy, or you introduce something with an enemy and it just makes it impossible to beat them? Like, how do you? Is that just all trial and error and running simulations, or like how do you keep balance? Because there is a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and the answer is a little boring. It's really through play testing a lot. Basically playing my own game, right? Like as I was building the game, for example, I will work on a certain area and then I will make monsters for that area, right? Enemies. And then I will be wondering, okay, are they too strong? Are they not strong enough? I made them about 20% stronger than the previous area. Is that too strong, too weak? I don't know, right? Or maybe they have an attack that is like just bad, right? So then I will play through the area and see and notice, oh, I'm like, this is really easy. And this enemy should actually be a lot harder. So then I will go and change it, for example. Or,
How
oh,
do you do
wait,
that? So like obviously you have kind of different levels, right? So you have on your first playthrough, um, you can play through, and as I said, you usually it'll kind of get stuck somewhere where you have to reset, but you don't know what I'm going to reset with and what advantages I'm going to get. So when you go and say, all right, with retiring, now they should be able to get to this, past the first area into the second area. But how do you know if it's too hard or not? Because if I got certain advantages, maybe it's super easy for me, but if somebody didn't get those advantages, then it'd still be super hard for them. Like, how do you?
So it's a little tricky, but what I will say is like a lot of those advantages that will happen only for you or for the other person come in the form of random storylines.
Right.
And the reality is a lot of those storylines, they are not actually required or expected to make progress in the game until you get very, very late into the game where you are actually unlock tools to be able to search for those storylines. And then the game becomes like a little harder on purpose because it starts expecting that you will actually search for them. But until then, like it's kind of balanced towards like you maybe having like just a few of them and not all of them. But yeah, like so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, and those bonuses are important. They are pretty strong, but and they seem strong. But the core of the game really is not so much about how strong you get, and because like a lot of like the bosses, which are usually the walls that you face where you like get stuck, right? A lot of them really revolve a lot more about strategy and like how do you tackle the boss, what spells do you use, what equipment do you use, rather than, oh, am I just strong enough? Do I have enough stats to beat the boss?
Mhm.
All right. So there is certainly a component of that too, but you can really get very, very far without like really being so high in terms of stats.
Right.
For as long as you pay attention to what the boss is doing and what is actually happening during the battle. And I think that's the reason why the game feels a little like feels balanced. It's because people can make progress even without having high stats. And even people with high stats can also struggle to some extent if they don't pay attention.
Right. Yeah. If you don't know, do the right strategy.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I got pretty far in on my first one playthrough. I mean, again, the battle took me 2 hours to beat the boss, but I was able to do it on with literally no buffs and no advantages. Um, and just so people know, I have not finished the game, but I am on the final battle. I've gotten pretty far in the game. And what I also find particularly exciting as we talk about this, the kind of things constantly are opening up. I mean, I played, let's say the first 10 days, pretty straight through, and thought I had seen everything. And then I got a new tab and was like blown away. It's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It was kind of an informational tab telling you stuff about the game. And I was like, oh, that's so cool that this is kind of a late little thing. And then on day 15, another tab showed up. So I'm 15 days in, and I'm literally playing. I told you I'm so addicted to this game. I literally have my phone running at all times, playing this game. So I mean, for 15 days straight, 24 hours a day, we're talking 300 hours of the game running, and it took 300 hours till I saw something new. Well, I mean, I've seen plenty of new things, but I'm just saying at the 300th hour, there were still new things to see, which I thought was just amazing. And I was peppering Matias here to reveal what other tabs are out there to me, but he kept it all secret on it. So, so maybe I'll find some even more things. And it sounds like, from our earlier discussion, you said you're doing updates every week and adding new items and new content. Is that more just kind of side quests, or are you doing, larger game stuff as well?
Yeah, actually, let me correct you a little. I'm not really adding new content every week. The game is finished. It has the main story is finished. It already has quite a bit of content.
Yes, absolutely.
What I'm adding is a lot of UI improvements. Like one bit that I'm adding is a lot of UI improvements. So, like like at the beginning, the game was not very usable at all. So I've been having to change the UI a lot in response to feedback, and I'm still doing so. Like recently, about 2 weeks ago, I released it on Steam, and the UI is different. You have a mouse, and people expect things like tooltips with the mouse cursor. So when they point to an object, they expect an explanation to pop up.
Mhm.
Also, they play on screens that are very big, so they want to have multiple things that they can see at each time. For example, be able to look at the campus and at research at the same time. And it wasn't possible before. So I've been doing a lot of updates in that sense.
Gotcha.
And also, I have been adding a little bit of content too, but it's more specifically like smaller things. Like, for example, in the update from last week, actually, I added a bestiary, like which basically is a feature where you can look at the stats from enemies that you have defeated. Like you can see like how much HP do they have, what items do they drop, and stuff like that.
How many times you fought them?
Yeah, how many times you have fought them, and basically you unlock that through a new storyline that I introduced at that time. But it's more of a smaller piece of content rather than extending the main story. So that's one type of thing that I'm adding, and then the other thing I'm adding.
I thought it would be cool too. I was thinking when I saw that bestiary that it'd be kind of cool too if you kind of used divination to unlock, what is the strategy to beat them, or what their weakness is. That would be kind of a cool mechanic. Like so, you have kind of base information that you're given right away, but there's kind of like again some hidden stuff that'll get revealed over time if you cast the reveal spell, basically.
Yeah, actually, I think that's an interesting idea. I didn't think about it, but I could definitely do something like that. It's just basically have to actually write a strategy for every single one of them.
Right.
But and the other type of thing that
or just like or just like, do they have a particular weakness? Like does damage or fire does more damage to them? Or water does more damage to them if they have kind of like
yeah, spoiler, there are no elemental weaknesses in this game.
Okay.
So like fire doesn't deal more damage against some enemy than water or anything like that. But the spells are different. So for example, fire spells are stronger, so they can pierce through defense more easily than water spells, for example.
But they also cost more mana to cast those fire spells. Right?
Yeah, it does cost more mana. The other thing I wanted to say is I am adding a second type of content, which is post-game content. So if you've finished the game, I'm still adding a little bit of things to it. So a few weeks ago, I added challenges to the game, which basically
you have to beat the game to get to these.
Yeah, you have to beat the game to get to these, and they actually expect you to be at a power level where you have beaten the game. And then the other thing that I still want to expand a little more on this game, on the post game, and have a little more content there. And then the other thing I want to add is a new game plus feature too, because what I found is a lot of people have gotten actually pretty addicted to the game, and they play through all the challenges and they still want more, that they are actually replaying the game. But it feels kind of like a bummer. You're resetting, you got no bonus or anything. You're just starting again from the beginning.
Right.
And you've already finished the game. You've seen everything there was to see. But it would be nice if the game somehow recognized that, for example, by making you just a little stronger this time. Or maybe the enemies are a little stronger, and then now you are facing a challenge that you were not facing before, or the gameplay is a little different. Right. So I'm still thinking about that, but it's something I want to add.
Yeah, I mean, again, for people, I've been now playing about 20 days straight. I am on the final battle. I have retired 5 times, and I have only seen 65% of the side quest content. So I still got 35% of that content to go. Just to give you kind of the amount of stuff and the breadth of stuff that is available to be revealed. I mean, there's constantly things being revealed. Do you have a kind of a guess or a feel like on average you're going to need to retire probably 10 times before you're going to be able to win this game?
Yeah, I think actually that is like probably spot on. I will say 10 or 11 times. When I played the game for the first time, it took me about that many retirements to get through the game. And then on Discord, there's a community on Discord where with a lot of people, and there's a channel where people share screenshots of their ending, and it tells you how many times you retired when you completed the game. And what I saw is that most people have, I think, between say 9 to 12 or 13 retirements, I will say. Some people have 17, 18, some people have 30. I've seen one with 5. So there's someone that was able to clear it with 5 retirements.
Yeah, I was at 5 retirements, and I think you told me I'm on the final battle, and I could only get them halfway down on their thing.
So it may have been pretty close. You may have done like pretty long retirements. There's actually people trying to beat the game without retirements or retiring as few times as possible. I don't think it's really possible without retirements, but I would not recommend it.
Yeah, I don't think it is because, like I said, well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it is because I did my first retirement, as I told you, really, really long, and I just got to a point where it was impossible to upgrade anything, any further, and or be powerful enough to, like to get more advanced weapons or armor. I actually needed to get to the next level, the next series of dungeons to get that, with the resources that drop there to craft anything that was better than what I had. So I literally was stuck at this one point, deep in the game. And then I kind of realized that retiring is not really the end of the game. It is just kind of a restart with the buffs. And I was like, oh, okay, let me try that. Yeah, if someone managed to do it on one playthrough, I'd love to know how they managed to do that.
I know. I think they got about halfway through the game.
Yeah, that's about
retiring, and I think they were not really able to go on.
Yeah, that was where I got to, about halfway through the game. So this game, again, I'm Mobile Accessible Games is a group for people who are blind and visually impaired for games that are accessible to them, which Magic Research is. As I told you, I'm completely blind and I'm at the final battle, so obviously it is completely accessible. How did you kind of find out about accessibility and the need for accessibility? Is that from your career at things like Facebook, or did someone reach out to you and say, can you add accessibility? How did you get kind of informed about making sure there was accessibility in your game?
Yeah, so actually this came to my attention because there was someone that actually reached out to me. So when I released the game on iOS, someone that was visually impaired basically tried out the game and then realized that they could somewhat play it. Right? It was clunky and like there were issues with the game, like but like basically icons were not really saying what they were. So if I had a button that was an icon, it would just not be readable properly by a screen reader, and then people will have to guess what it is. So they just reached out to me and said, hey, like your game actually plays fairly decently with a screen reader. And I was very surprised because when I designed the game, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
Like the reality is I didn't even think about it. So when I actually like got that feedback and then realized that people were actually trying to play the game, and after I got through my surprise, I realized that the game actually has a lot of text and it's basically mostly text. So it sort of makes sense that it will be playable or at least close to playable. And so I decided to try and get past those last steps to make it actually more playable, like actually to get the result that we have now. Like basically labeling buttons, adding the post exploration feature, which is very important.
Oh, yes.
That one was very important, and also making sure that navigation is like possible through headings, like that they are being announced correctly to the screen reader. And a lot of this really, what helped me a lot in this process really was the constant feedback I kept getting from not just from this person, but also from other people from the blind community that also reached out to me and gave me feedback either through the support email that I have app or through Discord or through like pretty much any other mean, even Reddit. I made a post on Reddit and there was feedback there. And that really let me know like what are the things that I should be focusing on to get the game to work. And so we end up at where we are right now.
Yeah, and so I'm constantly asking developers like what could we as blind players or gamers do to help support you in creating an accessible game. And and over the course of 50 interviews now, the self advocacy, so many developers have said, well, someone reached out to me, someone let me know, and therefore then I checked it out and I made the game accessible. It seems like the most powerful thing that we can do to encourage developers to create games is just make them aware and let them know and let our voices be heard. And obviously this person, I'm sure, did it in a kind and respectful way. It sounds like letting you know that your game's great and I'd love to play it, but it needs a little bit more accessibility for it to be workable. Would you say that's kind of the thing that kind of drove you most through accessibility and is the most powerful thing, is just letting your voice be heard as a person who's blind and visually impaired?
Yes, I think that's really the most important thing, because normally as we develop, like the reality is like the community is still small in terms of like the fraction they make of like the total market.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not the first thing that we think about. And so it's not really it's an oversight. It could either be an oversight or it just doesn't justify the market investment to create a game specifically for visually impaired. So I think I really think just increasing awareness, reaching out to developers and saying, hey, as you mentioned, like it would be great if this game was made accessible. It looks like it's almost there. I think if there was a situation like that, I'm pretty sure many developers would be willing to work with that.
I mean, the one good thing, well, you're right, it is a small group. The one thing is there's so many games that are not accessible for us. So, there's a much smaller set that is accessible. And so when you get a game like Magic Research, which is really fun and addictive and accessible, once that word kind of moves its way through the blind community, I think you'll get a lot of blind people playing it because there's not a lot of games for us to play. And here's one that's fun, and here's one to play. So at least, you get a kind of high adoption rate or high interaction rate with the blind community once they become aware of it. And I saw that you posted it out on AppleVis, which is a great place to post it to let the blind community know that there's a game out there. So
actually, it was not me that posted it. So that's something else. That's interesting. So basically, I think it may have been the same person that reached out to me and said, "Hey, like your game is almost there. Can you help make it accessible?" And then they actually decided to just post it because they really like the game.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. And that's originally how I found out about it. I went out to Apple Vista to see what new games people were saying were accessible. And that's where I learned about it to start. When you're creating this game, what program are you using to do it? Is it Unity or is it something else or?
Yeah, so basically I'm not really using any sort of game engine. So this is a game, but actually it's more like an app, basically, like a phone app.
Okay.
So I'm using a framework called React Native, which basically lets you build cross-platform applications in JavaScript,
Okay.
and then you can run them in iOS, in Android, and you can even like make like a website out of it too. So I think I'm not really using any game engine. I'm using this, and because of that reason, I think I think that's one of the key reasons why like the game was kind of like somewhat playable already from the get-go without me doing anything special. It's because since it's kind of like a framework that relates closely to web, and there's already things that can read websites pretty well, um, it kind of like already incorporates that into like how things work. And basically, as you build, say, any sort of other app, right? Like say you're building Spotify, I'm not sure, right? Like any other thing. A lot of those things are things that you really consider. And so I think that actually helped, like the decision to use React Native actually, like it was a coincidence, but it actually helped me a lot with like being able to make this game accessible to the blind community.
Would you say it was React Active or something that was the application that you're using?
React Native.
React Native. How did you get tuned in that you could do this on that if it's not a traditional, game development tool?
Yeah, so first of all, this game is pretty text-based, right? So I thought since there's no 3D graphics or anything really fancy, like I don't really need to use game engines. So that was my starting point. And then the second thing I was thinking is I want to make a mobile I want to make this a mobile game, right? But I want to ship it across many different platforms. And so then that's basically what made me choose React Native over like other alternatives. I also had experience with it from my time at Facebook. Like React and React Native are frameworks that Facebook developed at first, and then they made open source so that everyone else can also use them. So since I already knew it, I thought, okay, it's a lot easier to start with because I already know what is going on. I can iterate quickly. And so I just ended up doing that.
And that tool is a little surprised. I like that tool is set up where the game can trigger something and then a whole new tab or section of the game pops into existence.
Oh, well, that's part of like the UI, right? There's two parts to the code that I had to write down. One was the entire backend, like all the systems, like what happens every time, say, like a fraction of a second passes, like what spells get cast and so on. And then the second part is like the UI, like what are the buttons, how are they arranged on the screen, and all of that. I also had to write that part, but the framework just makes it a lot easier to write.
Would you, so like in the coding, you have, like your first chance to explore the dungeons seems to be triggered by putting a weapon in your hand. And so does the code kind of just recognize like soon as that occurs, then that, puts on an indicator that, that triggers that event?
Yeah, so basically every time there is like there's a state change on the state of the game, the game is constantly checking, oh, like did the person put a weapon, or like did the player equip a weapon, and have we unlocked exploration yet? And if we haven't unlocked exploration and they equip a weapon and an armor, they have like a weapon and an armor equipped, then at that point we unlock it, right? It happens only once, because then once it's unlocked,
Right, it's all locked.
like it's not going to run again.
So, now it sounds like, you're doing some tweaks to the UI, as you said, to Magic Research. And you said you're kind of going to go to the New Game Plus and things like that. What is your next game idea? Is it going to be kind of in the same sort of world, or you have something else in mind that you'd like to tackle, or is that going to be years down the line because you're going to continue to work on Magic Research for a while? What's the kind of future game plan of your plans?
It's a difficult question because this was a side project of mine. Like when I introduced it, I said I was working. I ended up spending a lot of time on this ever since I released it. And the reality is, like, I thought I would release this. It will get maybe like, say, 100 or 200 sales, and then some people will notice and maybe like it, and then that's it. Right? I wasn't really having any sort of expectation, but the reality is that, like, now I'm having to think, like, what do I want to do with my life? Because, like, it turns out that the game was successful enough that I should be actually thinking about potentially, like, if this is something that I would like to do, then perhaps I could continue doing it. So I haven't really decided yet what I will do, like, in the future.
That's
If I were to
amazing.
say,
I mean, if
yeah,
a game again, there's so many games released every single day that to get the traction enough that you're in a position where you are now considering, do I?
yeah, it's
That's
crazy.
amazing. Yeah.
It's crazy. I wouldn't have imagined it. So what I will
Uh,
think in terms of, like, next game and stuff and ideas, what I can say is I do have some ideas on, like, possible, like, future games, but I still need to really think about it, and I don't know if, I don't know if, like, I want to dedicate myself to this type of work in the future. But if I do want to make perhaps a game that's similar to Magic Research, perhaps another incremental game, but also that may also have to do a lot with Magic, but at the same time be different enough from Magic Research that it feels like its own thing. Maybe something broader, either with less focus on combat or exploring ideas that I haven't been able to explore in Magic Research, like perhaps either no focus on combat or a different combat system entirely. So that's one. And then another thing I wanted to perhaps try doing, but I'm not so convinced about, is make another crafting game. So when you introduce Magic Research, you said it's an idle crafting game, which I don't think it's quite right because you don't really craft so much in this game. There's a crafting feature, but it's not very detailed. Like, there's a lot of items and stuff, but it's not really the focus of the game. The focus of the game is casting spells. But perhaps, like, I could make another game where like you can, like, basically, like, craft a lot of different things, perhaps play small mini games that are specific to each thing, and then as you craft them, you get more skillful or you unlock new things in a very similar way to, like, how it happens in Magic Research, right? Like bringing over that element of discovery, but to a different game entirely. But again, like, those are just ideas right now. I don't know if I will ever do them. And right now, the main thing I want to do is finish up the post-game content for Magic Research, which will probably take me like about a month or two. Make sure most of the loose ends are tied with the game, and that there are no, like, huge UI improvements that I still have to make, or, like, bugs I need to fix. And then only then, like, start thinking about, like, what to do in the future. The reality is too, like, I'm here in Japan studying the language, and so, like, I also have to think about, like, what do I want to do next about that.
Sure.
Do I want to go back to the United States? Do I want to continue in Japan and try seeking a different type of visa that will let me stay for longer? And if I do that, does that mean that I need to work at a Japanese company? And if I do that, does it mean that I should be spending some of my time making games or not? I don't know yet.
Yeah. A lot of lifing to do, right?
And yeah, how to make life decisions.
Right. Before we wrap up, there's one thing that I also wanted to mention that I just thought was ingenious about this game is, on these type of games, there is kind of like, well, when the game is open and you're playing it, it is advancing. If you walk away from the game and you're going and checking your email or YouTube or whatever, the game kind of pauses and stops. And when you come back, it resumes. And, that can get kind of frustrating from, trying to make advancement because you can't be in an app all the time. Although I kind of have for the last 20 days. But When you walk away from Magic Research and you go check your email or go do whatever, you generate these things called timepieces, and you can basically turn the timepieces in, a certain amount of timepieces to basically fast forward the game, 15 minutes and have it, run through all of the, whatever you're doing, casting of all the spells and gathering all the resources and exploring all the dungeons, and kind of do a quick fast 15-minute fast forward. So, while you're away for a few hours, you can kind of recover some of that time back and advance the game in kind of these quick spurts, which I thought was just a great way to, feel engaged and have people not kind of walk away from the game because, it just doesn't advance enough because I'm not in it all the time. They can play what they, as long as they want, walk away, gather up the timepieces. There is a certain capacity level that you end up hitting, but turn those in for, recovering a good portion of that time that you were away. And I thought that was really an ingenious concept. And I didn't know, where did you pick that up? Because I've never seen that anywhere else in a game like this that I played.
Oh, I think there is probably a few games that kind of use this mechanic where basically if you spend your time away from the game, you get a currency or something, and then you can use the currency to speed up the game. It's usually speeding up the game. There's a few other variants. So with games like these, it's typical that when you go away and then come back, they actually either keep running in the background or they are able to quickly simulate what happened during the time you were out. And so when you come back, you already have that progress. Like, I don't know, like, and maybe like it calculates that you have been defeating one enemy per minute and then you were out 30 minutes. So then what will happen? Like, it basically gives you the loot from 30 enemies, right? Stuff like that. What I found is, so I initially wanted to do something like that. But what I found was that I couldn't, like, if I were to basically simulate time when you come back, it will take too long. Like, it will take basically like 1 minute to simulate the 8 hours since you went to sleep, for example. And so people want to skip it, but then they miss out on progress, or they will just close the game because they don't want to wait the 1 minute, right? That's very frustrating. Right?
Terrible attention span.
So then, yeah, so then I thought this timepiece system was kind of like well, I will say it's kind of like it's like a trade-off basically, like where I can give the currency immediately, but then if you want to use it, you do have to spend a little time with the game because you have to press the button and then wait until it warps the 15 minutes. But then there's also a few other ways to use it.
Yeah.
And what I found is that when I actually implemented it, I actually thought it was a great idea. And the reason why is because normally if you just leave the game running, say while you sleep, right, the 8 hours.
Yes, which I did.
Right, like you're probably going to be fighting the same area for the 8 hours, right? And then by that time you will accumulate a lot of resources and items and stuff like that, but then you won't actually make progress in the main game. All right. But if, say, instead of that, the game gives you timepieces, what I found is that just by warping ahead 15 minutes, you will have made enough progress to probably skip to the next area, for example, right? And then you can make adjustments. And then when you're already making the adjustments, you warp another 15 minutes and you're ready to do more progress again.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought it was very powerful.
Yeah, it really is, because that's how I use it. And then, as you said, there's some different ways. Like you can advance the game, I think, 15 minutes, or you can advance your researchers researching by 25 minutes. So that's actually where I use it a lot. It's just to advance my researchers at the 25 minutes. And there's some other late in the game. There's some other ways that you can use timepieces, which I won't reveal at this point. But really, I thought that was a great, fascinating mechanic, and added kind of, again, another layer of strategy, as you said, of different ways that you can use it and use it most efficiently. You were talking about letting the game, run on your bedside table while you're sleeping. I do that, and then I'll wake up at 3 in the morning, and I'll be like, "Let me just check on it. Let me see how I'm doing." And
Yeah,
suddenly it's 4 in the morning, and I've
I
been
will.
upgrading things. So my sleep the last 20 days has not been great, and it's really your
I
games.
will. I will not recommend that.
No,
Just give your phone a break. Like there is a function in the game to keep it running, but like it could potentially like I don't know. It's still doing a lot of processing and not actually like sleeping. So
yeah. The iPhone will track your screen time. How much were you on the phone in the course of the day? And I'm like 23 hours and 52 minutes. Like I've been only off the phone for 8 minutes a day because I'm letting this game run the entire time in the background. So it's pretty funny. But look, I really appreciate you taking the time to. I think this is a fabulous game, super addictive. As I said, I'm at the final battle, so it's accessible. It requires a little bit of a patience because again, at the beginning, it opens up a little slowly at the beginning, but it kind of the more it opens up, the faster it starts opening up in some ways. So I really encourage people, stick with it. I'll say until you get through the boss at the end of the basement dungeon level. If you get there, you're on your way of kind of getting a sense of what this game is. But it continues to open up even over the course of the 20 days I've played. So I really recommend everybody give it a try. It's very addictive. Really, really fun game to play, and I really appreciate you taking the time to put it together, and also listening to that person who reached out to you and said, can you add accessibility, and taking the time to do that. It really has made this game usable and accessible for the blind and visually impaired, and it's a great game to play, and different than other games that we've seen out there. So I appreciate it.
yeah, I'm glad you were able to like have so much fun with it. One thing I want to mention though, like I want to mention a little bit about the availability of this game. So
Mhm.
it's available on Android, iOS, and Steam.
Mhm.
But specifically for the visually impaired community, I will say do not play the Android version
Okay.
because it does not work well with Talkback and you will have a lot of issues. So if you have an iPhone, you can play it on iOS. I think it works pretty well on iOS. Or if you have a computer, you can just like get the Steam version directly on Steam. And if you're not sure about the game, there is also a web demo that you can try out. And it's also available on Steam as well, the same demo, the same content.
Mhm.
And that actually gets basically, it has all the content until the end of the school basement, which is coincidentally the same place that you mentioned
Right.
people should stick towards. So if you're not sure, feel free to give it a try on those two platforms. And then you can see if it's a game for you or not.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much, and be sure to come back and let us know any updates to Magic Research, or if you move on to another game. I'd be really excited to hear what you are working on, and would love to interview you about that if when that time comes. So, again, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and tell us all about Magic Research. Again, available on Steam, Google Play, and the Apple App Store, and available around the world, I assume.
Mhm.
And so again, go check it out. It's a great game.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me over.
Yeah, my pleasure.